Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar from Economic Change about using Salesforce for volunteer management. We will be going through the opportunities and the functionality that Salesforce can offer to manage volunteers today. We should be going through for about an hour. There will be time for questions and answers, but if you've got a burning question throughout the session, please do put it within your question box, which I should see on your side panel. And then we can pause at various points and respond to those as appropriate. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining us, and I will work through the presentation and hopefully you'll find it useful. So just an introduction to economic change and why we got involved in Salesforce. So as an organisation, we have been supporting non-profit organisations to develop their business strategy and their social impact measurement for the last 11 years. We got involved in Salesforce 5 years ago to basically support and underpin organisations to develop robust business strategies and impact measurement frameworks to provide a full solution. So not only are we planning what they're going to do, we also implement the tools to help them track and deliver what they do. So they have an end-to-end monitoring process in place, so they can either assess their performance across volunteer management, marketing, sales, fundraising, HR, delivery of services. It's really about providing a robust management system. So we specialise in management solutions. That's how we present ourselves, and Salesforce for us really does underpin the foundation of that, because it's the glue that holds everything together and collects all the information. We chose Salesforce as the solution because they offer non-profits, or particularly charities, 10 free licenses and other non-profit legal models, discounted licenses. So it's an affordable solution. It is one of the world's largest CRM solutions, and it has 3 new releases a year, so it's continually developing its functionality and its features, which you can opt into. So it does really offer top-end CRM digital capabilities for non-profits at a really sort of affordable price. So hopefully you'll get a feel for what some of those are today. Our approach to implementation is quite a structured sort of step-by-step guide. We really like to help our clients think through the process, and so we put together our guides, and we have 4 different guides. The ones I've highlighted here are our guide to measuring impact, because quite a lot of volunteer measurement is about outputs and outcomes, which we'll go into in a moment. And then we also have a guide around developing management systems, which is again, you know, a step-by-step process to think about, well, how do I develop my system? What does it need to do? What's the business case? What are the requirements? What's the reporting and dashboard requirements? What's the processes we're going to use? So both of those resources can be downloaded from our website if you want to sort of have a look at those in more detail. So focusing in on volunteer management, what do we mean by that? What does it encompass? I've highlighted some of the areas here that really, you know, when we work with clients, we help them focus on and streamline. So at the top, we've got recruitment. And so that's all about recruiting volunteers, which might be the first time they volunteer for you, but it also might be for subsequent roles as well. And when people are recruited for roles, they then go through quite often a series of quality checks, which might be reference requests, or it might be DBS checks. And then they're put through maybe a series of training, which could be anything from a virtual webinar through to a training course. So again, different organisations operate in different ways, but they're sort of the core components when people start to engage in volunteering roles. Once they've kind of gone through that induction process, they then can be matched to roles. And again, different organisations have different ways of doing this. Some have shift management functionality, where there's a volunteer role every single Saturday that somebody needs to be placed into, whilst others will have more sporadic opportunities where they may be matched to mentor a young person for a series of 6 months, and then, you know, they would repeat that cycle again 6 months later to be matched to somebody else. So that happens in different ways. For their volunteering, it's obviously nice to provide support to volunteers in their role and also to provide recognition. So we've helped clients achieve that using Salesforce, and then also gathering their feedback and satisfaction. So again, we'll look at all these ways that we anticipate how you engage with volunteers, support them, and also allow them to sort of feedback to you about, their quality of experience, but also the impact overall that the volunteering has made for them. In terms of what to track, we also have a free briefing paper that you can download from our website, which is about what to track for volunteers. So having worked with various clients, we put together a list of some of the top sort of data tracking requirements that people have. So during the recruitment of volunteers, you'll see we've got a number of areas here, which might be they want to know about the number of applications and what stage they're at, number of interviews, number of training hours that people have had, the average length of recruitment process, so they can get a feel for actually how long things are taking, number of active volunteers they have on their books, what the background of volunteers are, particularly in terms of demographics or economic status, and what the motivations and goals and interests are for volunteers, which is becoming increasingly important now in terms of really understanding, what attracts volunteers to your organisation and how do you retain them. And for some government-funded contracts, it's been important to know whether they're a first-time volunteer or not, because maybe your organisation is involved in helping people become a volunteer for the first time, and that's seen as sort of an indicator of health and well-being and things like that. So there's some of the areas that you can track around recruitment of volunteers, and that we've helped people to embed in Salesforce so they can report on this real time. Now, in terms of outputs of volunteers, which is really the scale of their intervention, what do they actually give to your organisation? We've got key KPIs here around number of hours of support provided, number of volunteers, number of active volunteers, number of beneficiaries supported by volunteers, the average number of beneficiaries supported by volunteers, the financial in-kind value, volunteer time given, and the average retention rate. And quite often these are key performance indicators that people want to track on an annual basis, but also maybe it can be done monthly. If the data is put into the system, you could look at any point in time and know how long over a chosen given period that you have performed against these KPIs. Now, once people are doing this, what is best practice, and we very much encourage, is tracking the outcomes for volunteers. So they've done all this great work for you, but what outcomes are actually being achieved by them? So we help you explore around, put in feedback forms around personal satisfaction, whether volunteers have achieved new skills and qualifications, whether there's been a change in attitude and beliefs, whether there's an improvement in health and well-being, whether it's helped them achieve their career, and whether they've progressed into education, employment, training. And again, these are some of the outcomes that some of our clients want to track. To think about wider outcomes, just to continue this conversation, you could also track the organisational growth that's attributable to volunteers. So maybe you can look and use your system to tell you, actually, have we managed to increase the number of beneficiaries supported due to having volunteers on board? Have the scale of our services increased? And have we increased the match funding as a result of our volunteers? And tracking the value, the in-kind value of volunteers is very important. So you can start to bring those kind of that sort of data and capture it within Salesforce. In terms of beneficiary experience, it can be also nice to look at the experience of beneficiaries and whether that can be attributed to volunteers as well. So if you do feedback forms with beneficiaries, can you ask them about whether they've had a positive experience and satisfaction, and whether they've achieved their personal goals, whether they've got a good retention rate, and whether they've referred their peers to the programme. And that might well be down to the actual volunteer they're working with, and I think that makes it quite powerful to show actually which volunteers are actually really good at their job. Whether you call it a job is also one of those things, but one of their roles, because actually maybe some volunteers perform better than others, and it's interesting to look at it from that sort of user perspective. In terms of volunteers themselves, you might also want to see whether the volunteer achieved their goal and whether they achieved outcomes that they wanted, and whether the volunteers have made connections through their role, or whether you've referred the volunteer to other people. So there's lots of information you can track, and quite often when we go through this, it kind of really opens your eyes to go, and actually we could capture all of this. And for some organisations, they'll say, actually, what we capture at the moment is enough. We don't want to overwhelm, but surely there's, there is scope to increase what you capture over time, and particularly where added value and outcomes and impact is becoming increasingly more important. It's something to definitely think about. So I'll send a link to our free briefing paper as part of the call. So in terms of next steps, once you define the framework and what you want to collect, you then need to define the processes. And what we do with clients is help them do a step-by-step process to see how they interact with volunteers, and we map it out in detail and look about how Salesforce and tools can support and enable that and make it more efficient. Once we've bottomed out the process, we then sort of start building the system and deploy data capture tools. So we'll work through this in more detail right now. Why a CRM? So some of you are Salesforce users already, whereas some of you might be considering Salesforce. Obviously, a CRM should give you all the same capabilities where possible. So we champion the use of a CRM over and above a spreadsheet, for example, because what we consider best practice is that you have a 360-degree view of your contacts. So you can look at Joe Blogs and see everything and all the interaction you've had with Joe, whether it's been a telephone call, whether they've been recruited for a specific role, whether they have delivered support, what feedback they've given. You can look in one place and see it all. So I'll be showing an example of that in a minute. If you have all of that information, that leads to a more intuitive client relationship. So you start to build better relationships with your volunteers because you know the history of interaction, you can respond to them better, and you can engage them better. And that supports improved team visibility. So that's really about making sure that your team feel confident and are clear on past relationships and are able to really maximise those in their role, whether they're involved in marketing, delivery, or quality control. As I've mentioned, it's all about real-time analytics. So if you're collecting all of this great data in your Salesforce system, that means that you can analyse it with reports and dashboards at any point in time. So we'll be giving an example of that. And there's also a step with improved security of data. So having a secure database with a login feature means that you can log in and you have to have a security check there. Normally there's a double layer security check, particularly if you're using from different systems using Salesforce, and that means your data is secure. It also means that if volunteers need to see data in your system, that you can lock down access, so they only need to see data that's relevant to them. So there's different ways to make data secure. Now, in terms of volunteer tracking, what I'm going to do is talk through some of the features that we talked about and expand on that, and jump between this slide and our demonstration Salesforce system, so you can see what that looks like in practice. Now, in terms of recruitment, a lot of our clients have used online application forms for volunteering and have moved to that rather than having a Word document, for example, on their website. That means that people click a link and it opens up a page with a set of questions that are filled in. So I'm just going to jump to our demo org. So here's an example with Envision, which is a youth-related organisation, and this is actually an online form that links directly with Salesforce. So as you can see, they have branded it completely to be in line with their website. And when this is completed, the information goes into the leads area in Salesforce and is then picked up by one of their staff to then sort of start the volunteer management process. So that's an example of how one form can look. Another example is the Shore Trust, and this is their volunteering page. So what they have here is complete a volunteer application online, and what this does is go through actually to a separate form where again people can fill this in, and this information goes straight into Salesforce again for sort of internal management and coordination between their regional teams across the UK. And so that has reduced administration for many of our clients because it means they can jump straight through. They don't have to input information from a Word a Word document. Now the difference between this is with Envision, this is a web to lead form, and web to lead is a feature with Salesforce that's available for free, and it means that the information goes straight into an object called leads. Whereas with this form, using form assembly, which is one of the tools, the information goes straight into contacts. And so what that does, if I look at my example, Andy Young, who's one of my volunteers, if he's filling it in, that would populate some of these fields, for example. And normally people have a set of, additional fields more than this, but it would capture anything that you want to do. So you would add fields in here that marry with your online form to collect all the relevant information. And then once this has come in, you normally have a status field. So you might have a status that's new sign up, for example, and that would alert somebody with an automated email or with a task, or you might well use a dashboard graph to show you the volunteers that have just applied and need dealing with. So there's different ways to see where people are at in the process. And when this is going through the sign-up process, what also happens is quite often we have separate objects of information that's captured around references and DBS checks that also gets contained within the system. We haven't got those two objects in our org here for you to see, but they would be separate objects at the top here that would say reference requests and DBS checks. And what we've done around that for organisations is, again, use an online form where a referee is sent an online form like this, where it says, please fill this in about the candidate that we're interviewing, and this information then again will go back into Salesforce to populate an area to say that the reference has been received, and that would alert the relevant person, the volunteer manager, to say the reference has been received, and it's all contained within here. So that's some of the features around recruitment and references. And again, a set of fields are normally included in the record around induction, so a tick box to say whether induction has taken place, or date fields about when it's happened. And in terms of training, quite often perhaps a series of training workshops take place. Some of our clients use Eventbrite, and I know my colleague Sarah will go into that in a little bit more detail, but Eventbrite can be integrated with Salesforce, so if you want people to sign up that way, they can do. But also, again, people use the online forms, as I've shown here, to get people to register for training. So if it's a free training, they would just, a URL would go out to them, which could be a URL that's embedded in their organisation URL, so it's not like a separate URL like this one, which says please sign up here if you can attend this training. So there's lots of features there, and again that means that if people are attending a training, that all comes back into the system. So I've got an example here, example volunteer camp, conference confirmed. Andy has confirmed that he is going to be attending the volunteer camp, so we've got an example event here that he's signed up to do. And then retention, so you can put in the status field shows whether somebody has moved from sign up to active, but also you can start to track if they are, how long they've been a volunteer for, so what date they started to what date they ended being a volunteer. So that's really interesting to see how long people have been a volunteer, and you can start to collect those sorts of statistics as well. In terms of allocation, so once they've confirmed as a volunteer, marketing might be used to engage people in different volunteer opportunities that are coming up. So we've integrated Salesforce with various e-marketing solutions, which could be MailChimp, Vertical Response, which are two free ones. You've also got e-marketing solutions such as .mailer, Campaign Monitor, and Exact Target, which also integrate with Salesforce for a price, and that depends on the number of emails that you send out a month, and the integration costs. So you are able to integrate, and again, if you're sending out information about specific roles, you can then also have an online sign-up form where they can say, yes, I'm interested in this role, and that might be a different role to what they did 6 months ago. So again, volunteers can have multiple roles and allow for that opportunity. And what I'm going to show you now is some opportunities around roles, shifts, search and match functionality and availability. So within Salesforce, there is a plugin which is an app that can be downloaded into your Salesforce called Volunteers for Salesforce. Now this solution, Sarah will again go into this in a little bit more detail, but it particularly suits organisations that have a regular shift pattern. So what I'm going to show you here is a shift calendar, and what it's doing is showing you what shifts are available for people to then sign up to, and there's an online form that people can fill in to say I'm interested in applying for this shift, and you know, they can sort of self-manage in that way. It's particularly suitable for that. For other clients who don't have that sort of shift, we generally, you know, avoid using this area and match people manually through manual objects and provide it. Now there is a matching feature, so I'm going to show you matching sort of how volunteers can be matched to opportunities. So this is an example where I can choose a volunteer status, active. I could then choose days available, volunteer availability, skills, and these lists can be altered depending on what fields you have available, for example, on your contact record. So it could be that, you know, I want to look by location, so I want, you know, volunteer location could be a selection on here. So I want to look at volunteers in London, for example. And so you can decide what fields are shown, and then once I'm just going to choose one here and click find, and what it's going to do is bring up the volunteers who are available and suit my criteria. And so I can see that Andy, Imogen, John and Lisa are all available, and I can see when they last volunteered, website update and volunteer organisation if they're linked to a particular organisation. And again, these fields can be amended to show you the information that's most useful to you. And once you've identified them, you could then sign them up to a shift this way. So the limitation of this is it only allows you to sign up to one particular shift. So volunteer job status will be prospect or confirmed, and then you can choose a specific shift if one's available, and then you could put the hours worked. So this works for allocating them to one shift, this particular section of it, and then you can click assign. But also, if I look at volunteer jobs, which is a list of all the jobs that are available, I can also assign volunteers this way. So this is showing the job role that's available, the number of shifts available, the location, and then I can set up volunteers who can attend here and add volunteer hours here. So there's various capabilities with this, short of not spending too much on it, but it's one solution that's available in the marketplace. As I've said, for some other clients, shift management type feature, it hasn't been suitable. So we've set up custom objects that allow matching to be done more on a manual basis once a search has been undertaken to find suitable people, because they're more sort of sporadic type matching. So there is capability and flexibility to have various different options. Now the other things that I have on my list here is information sharing and tracking deliverables. So what do we mean by that? Well, information sharing could be as simple as sending emails to a volunteer to say we are going to match you with somebody. So here what I'm going to do is navigate to a support plan. So with Andy has been assigned Lisa as his beneficiary to work with and provide employment volunteering support to. So we can see Andy's been assigned to it. This is a support plan that has been set up for Lisa to say what she's interested in, how she would rate herself, for example, on confidence at the beginning and at the end, and relationships. And then what we've got here is support that happens below. Now Andy has access. If we give him access to Salesforce, we could show him all of this information through something called a community license, and I'll show you that in more detail in a minute. And this allows him to see the support plan, but it also allows him to create support records and to see assessment records. So he can say, okay, I visited Lisa on this date and did 3 hours. So he's busy creating this information, and he can also see the assessments, as I've mentioned. So what I'm going to do is take you through to Andy's view of what this system would look like if he logged in. So I've just nipped back to Andy's contact record. I'm just going to log in as him. And so what this is doing is bringing me to a volunteer community. Now this is an example homepage which we set up for a client, but there's many different ways that you can present the front page depending on what you like. So I'm just going to click on to one of these areas to bring me through to the sort of next area. So as I mentioned, with the support, Andy logs in and he can see this customized community area. So he can see the support plan, as I mentioned, for Lisa, and he can also create support records, and he can access, with giving them community access to the CRM, it means that he can access this via his mobile phone, a tablet or his laptop, and be able to input this information where he is at the time. So he's directly inputting, and for some of our clients this has directly saved them time, because what they've done is move the administration of delivery onto the volunteers to do. The other way that this has been achieved is through online forms. So they've sent an online form, such as this type of template, to a client, to the volunteer, to say, please record the number of hours you've done this month. And so with this, you're not giving them access, but you're giving them an option to fill in a form that will then bring that data back into your system. And there's two types of tools. One is an online form, and the other is like an offline form. So even if they're offline, they can still populate this information, and when it does go online and sync, the data will come back into your CRM. So there's costings around both of those features, but that does allow another way of inputting data. And if they don't have access to this system, for example the support plan, what a volunteer manager can do is send an email from Salesforce, and it will mail merge data within this support plan, for example, into that email for them. So the process could be that I'm going to email Andy and say, right, we've assigned you Lisa, please find below information about their requirements. And so information like what they're interested in, what their goals are, can be mail merged into an email, rather than again them having direct access into your system. So there's different ways of providing that type of support. Now in terms of tracking deliverables, just to sort of look at this final element, this goes into very much the outputs and outcomes, and what you can see here is that it's calculating the support that Lisa is having, and this type of information, if I just click it back out of the community again, so the support plan, we go to the support plan here, and Lisa, what I've got here is I can see the value of support that's been provided to Lisa by Andy, and this is based on a value that we've put on Andy's volunteer time. So for Andy to volunteer, we have estimated that his hourly rate, in-kind hourly rate, is £20. And so what it's doing is calculating all the number of hours, the financial value that is an in-kind value of Andy's time, and we've then sort of documented this as an in-kind value support. So this can be all sort of automatically rolled up, and we've also tracked like number of support hours, the duration on program, and again you can track a whole range of different outputs and outcomes that I mentioned earlier within the system. Now, in terms of providing support to volunteers, moving on to this area, what we've got is event attendance. So I showed you that before when we were talking about training and how that can be captured in the system. But also you might want to track supervisions that have happened with volunteers, and that one-to-one support that you're providing to volunteers. That would be similarly like a support record that I just showed you. You could also open up peer support. So going back into the community now, so I'm just going to log back in. What Salesforce offers through the community feature is something called Chatter. Now Chatter is like Facebook basically. It allows people to converse with each other that have got community licenses or Chatter licenses. So one way to look at this, I've set up a group, because quite often it's nice to have groups of interest, and you could set up various groups. So you might have thematic groups, you might have location groups. So here I've set up London volunteers. And what I can see is my volunteers are chatting to each other and supporting each other. So Mark Smith is a volunteer, and he said, my mentee is looking to go into a marketing job. Does anybody know of any junior marketing jobs that are available? And so the different volunteers have responded to him and said, yes, I think our company is recruiting, I'll send over a job spec. And Andy is like, yeah, I'm happy to provide some specific marketing training. So they're all supporting Mark in his volunteering role. And Mark's also shared a resource. So again, it's great for sharing resources. And there can be a files area. So you can see files here where resources can be saved, and they can be uploaded by both volunteers and internal staff as a central resource area. And you can also have voting type solutions. So Sam is a volunteer manager, and he wanted to get people's opinions on what the topics should be for upcoming events. So he's asked people to vote, and as you can see here that people have voted predominantly for mental health training, because that's the topic that's particularly coming up quite a lot. So anybody can post, they can attach files, they can log a case, and a case is quite important and links to this object here, because maybe they have a particular situation with a candidate that they want to get support on, and so they can log a case and say, hey, I've got a situation with a volunteer, that with a mentee that I've got a problem with. Can somebody give me some additional support? So there's a more formalised Q&A support process there. But also people can give thanks to each other, so people can get badges for recognition. So they may have done 100 hours of volunteering, so you might want to give them a thanks badge, and you can see that within the community. Or you might want to give them a thanks badge for being a specific expert in their area and sort of being the marketing expert. So there's various different features that can be used within this. And so you can set up group functionality. And again, Chatter is available on people's mobile phones or their tablets, so they can have immediate access. And just going through to a person's profile, so I'm going to look at Andy's profile. He can customize on his profile how often he gets emails. So he might only want to get emails once a day, or as they come in, or he might want to get them on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. Again, you can sort of set parameters around when you get information. That's all managed through his profile up here, My Settings. And he can choose to follow people within the community. So again, he can choose to follow what different people are doing within the community, and he can see a whole string of what people are chatting about. So if he wanted to see what was going on in any particular group, he can come to the main Chatter tab and see things. And you can also set things like topics as well. So if you're supporting different areas, there's also a topic feature. So it creates a community for people to come together and share expertise, support each other in their roles. And again, quite a few of our clients now, I'll sort of come on some case studies, have set up this for their clients to use, as well as being able to access and create records through the volunteer system. In terms of other support, I've talked about badges and endorsements, so people can get qualifications and badges and be recognised using Salesforce and the work.com platform, that's called. But also any correspondence with volunteers can also be tracked in the system, so whether you've had a telephone call with them or emails, that can all be tracked within the system as well. Now finally, in terms of outcomes, outcomes with volunteers can be equally important to track, so whether that's achievements, feedback, progression, and then reports and dashboards. So we'll just go and have a look at some of the features available with this. So logging out of the community, again within the community you can provide the feedback forms and ask them to fill them in, or complaints area if they've got a particular problem, again, which you can use cases for. So with Salesforce, you can have, oh, it's logged me out, hang on a moment, I will just log back in. That sometimes happens when I've been in the community. So within Salesforce, you can again use the online form tools that we've suggested for feedback forms. There is a free, there's various different feedback forms. There is one available for free on the App Exchange, which is built by Salesforce. And this is, you know, an example feedback form here that we've got and provided. And what happens is you collect all the information about outcomes and feedback. You can start to create your dashboards, and I've got an example feedback dashboard here. So here I can see number of volunteer hours by month, rating of experience by volunteers. We've asked volunteers how they will apply their skills. We've asked them if they've developed new skills, number of volunteer feedback forms completed. Again, you can set up a whole range of different graphs. For those of you not familiar with Salesforce, if I click on one of these dashboards, it takes me to the reports area. And the best thing about Salesforce, for me, from a sort of analytics point of view, is that you can customize and build reports around any information in your system. So depending on what object you choose, you can select the fields that are available within that object in your system. So if I put in discharge date, I can add these fields to my report. I can add different charts, and I can choose the chart that I want to create, and I can choose the time frame. So with birthday, I could say, well, I want to just see volunteers that are aged under 25 or those over 50, or I could see whether they, you know, when they filled in their feedback form, whether it was this year. And again, you can completely filter your reports, add the fields you want, create the graphs you want to produce the type of data that is useful to you, and reporting on whether your volunteer management system has had what, you know, is achieving that you set out to achieve. So I'm just going to close this report. Now, with what we're looking at the moment is the classic version, which is, you know, traditionally how Salesforce has looked. There is now a new Lightning version, and I'm just going to go to that dashboard so you can just get a feel for how Lightning version looks. I did it in Classic because I know some of our people on the line currently use Salesforce Classic still, but if I just nip over to switch to Lightning, people are starting to move over to Lightning Experience, which is a new look Salesforce. So I just want to give you a sense of what that looks like, because if you're new to Salesforce, it might well just be ready to embark on the new look. So as you can see, it looks more sort of flashy in terms of how it looks. If I click on a contact record just to show you how that looks, so Andy, I'll just click on his contact. You can see if I click on details, you'll see how this now looks. And again, you can customize these pages, but his information is here, which is a new look view. I can track what the timeline is and when we last met with him here, or log new tasks or calls, and I can see the related list and how Andy's involved in different things on this particular tab. In terms of how the dashboard looks in contrast to the one that I just showed you, it looks slightly different in that it's got sort of, you know, different look to the dashboard and reports, and also in terms of chatter and how that looks. It doesn't look too different, but it's got a slightly different look to it in terms of how you see things and how information is shared. So that's sort of the different look that you can have with Salesforce in terms of what you get. So that's sort of a synopsis around sort of functionality and how it's used. In terms of data collection methods, we've talked about various things here, so just to summarise really, what you can have is online forms that people fill in, and that inputs data directly into your CRM in a number of various different objects and areas that you want to collect that data. You could also have offline forms that are available, and both of these are powered by, well, offline forms are powered by a third-party solution provider that integrates with Salesforce. With online forms, you can have it native to Salesforce and use their technology, or you can use third-party solutions. There's pros and cons of both of those. As we mentioned, you can have community licenses, which allow people to log into your system and see the data they need to see. In terms of mobile and tablet, you've got Salesforce One, which is available for free as a Salesforce user, which means you can access your database from your app, your smartphone or device. You can have website interaction, so you can actually expose Salesforce directly onto a website, and I'll show you one of those solutions in a minute where it's been branded and looks like a website, so you wouldn't actually know it's Salesforce. And you can also interact using social media to collect data and get it within your CRM. Now I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk about some of the volunteer apps available on Salesforce and some of the third-party apps that we use for clients. So I'm just going to hand over to Sarah so she can talk you through some of these options.
Excellent. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm just going to quickly talk you through some of the volunteer apps on Salesforce. So Volunteers for Salesforce is the one that my colleague Heather has already been talking about in the previous demo. So Volunteers for Salesforce is free. It's a really good app that allows you to have access to a volunteer calendar showing the different shifts that your volunteers have planned for the upcoming weeks. It can allow you to have self-service with sites, so as Heather was saying, you can say what volunteering you're interested in with some free forms that it includes, but most people that use the Volunteers for Salesforce app do combine it with a better self-service portal such as Community or editing the existing sites more with the use of a developer. It also allows you to track volunteer hours, easily match the volunteers with that Find Volunteer section that Heather was showing, and easily create recurring shifts. So that if someone is only volunteering every Monday for the next 20 weeks, then they can just create that in one go rather than having to laboriously create them one by one. You can set up some auto reminders, but it also allows you to mass email everyone of a specific volunteer role with a specific email template. So you can quickly communicate with all of the people if, for instance, you've changed location for a particular volunteering activity, or if you've changed the time, or if you just want to send them reminders. So it does include some sites and the forms that Heather was talking about, but again, we've got a tick and an X there because most people use additional web pages and website functionality in order to really give them the benefits for this that they need. The other good thing about it is it has editable code. So what that means is, because Volunteers for Salesforce was created by someone that works at Salesforce for charities, you can customize it further for your own needs. It's not managed. So you can go into the back end of Salesforce and edit it so it really fits your requirements, which is what a lot of our clients we've done for them. So we've edited the back end of the Volunteers for Salesforce app so it fits better how they want to recruit their volunteers. Handson Connect is another really good volunteer management app out there, which was created initially for a very large volunteering charity. It does cost money on a one-by-one negotiation. It's not editable, but it does come with a much better out-of-the-box self-service webpage where people can see their data, where they can see their calendars, say what they're interested in, and it also allows you to easily track their preferences so you can then easily match them to roles or projects that you might have coming up. The volunteer management from the Salesforce Lab is another free app on the App Exchange. It's kind of become a bit redundant with Volunteers for Salesforce, as I think Volunteers for Salesforce has a lot more functionality than the volunteer management app, but I do still know charities that use it as it's very slightly different and a little bit easier to integrate at the beginning. So that doesn't have the volunteer calendar, but it does allow people to say what their preferences for different types of volunteering is. It allows you to send emails and really uses the standard Salesforce functionality of workflow, email templates to try and automate as much of that functionality as possible. Now, form assembly, although not an actual volunteer app itself, has been used by many charities as a way of managing volunteers. For instance, a large education charity that used to work with use form assembly in order to gather information that they need from volunteers on a sort of drip feed basis. So you can set up your forms to slowly gather the onboarding information, such as the references, such as the initial application form, follow-up feedback, and then pull that all into exactly the objects in Salesforce that you want to. So you can really customize form assembly to automate as much of the process as possible that fits your precise version that you are running. The sort of down points for the form assembly is obviously it doesn't have the volunteer calendar aspect that, say, Volunteers for Salesforce and Handson Connect have, as it's not specifically made for managing volunteers. It's just a good tool that you can utilize to do so. Job Science is actually a HR app that is out there that a lot of companies use to recruit actual employees. So there's a few large international development charities that use Salesforce that have used the Job Science app to recruit their volunteers and to onboard their volunteers, as it comes with some job sites where they can post the jobs to, and it comes with some really good tagging technology so that they can very easily find exactly what types of volunteers for what sort of jobs, volunteering roles, etc. that they have available. Job Science is more for sort of very large scale volunteer movements, as it does probably cost the most out of all of these by a way. But the one thing that it has that the others don't really have is the sort of social media integration. So it can sort of integrate very well with Facebook and Twitter. But there's some of the other apps that don't do that, could be combined with another app that would do that, which still might work out more cost effective. So the Eventbrite sync, which Heather again was talking about earlier, the Eventbrite sync is a way that you can get your Eventbrite information into Salesforce. So when someone first opens or says that they want to attend an event, it searches Salesforce to find out if they exist. And if it doesn't, if they don't, then it creates a contact record or a lead record for them, depending on your preference. And then it creates a campaign member for them, which is a way of saying that they're going to attend a specific event that you've created. So by creating these records in Salesforce, some charities out there are actually using the Eventbrite form as a way of actually registering volunteer interest. Because once then their records are in Salesforce, they can then have separate Eventbrite forms for specific volunteering events. So this works really well for things like challenge events that you might have, or one-off volunteering events such as come to Hackney to plant trees for a day, as it relies on the Eventbrite platform, which is already well known, and really allows you to promote your volunteering events to perhaps a wider audience than you otherwise might not have. But again, people would normally combine that with other functionality in order to really give the full package, as it doesn't allow you to have a volunteer calendar showing exactly what the volunteers are doing. And then in terms of, and I'll just move this down here, apologies. The sort of final option is it is possible to do all of this through sort of a mixture of the community site that Heather was showing, and then customizing Salesforce with code. So you can have a Visualforce page act as your volunteer calendar, which we have done for charities in the past. If, for instance, you're not quite doing shift volunteering, but you still want that functionality, then that is possible through a Visualforce page, but just requires initial development time. You can also then create different Visualforce pages for finding your volunteers, which again, I know that Teach First, an education charity, have a Visualforce page that they use to match their volunteers to volunteering roles. And again, that would cost money initially, but if you did just Visualforce pages, then there would be no monthly cost going forward. If you wanted to do community logins, whereby the volunteers can log in and actually manage their data themselves, thus cutting down on admin time, then that would be a monthly license cost, which we can give you the figures for if you are interested in any of these options. So I'm just going to hand back to Heather now. Heather, are you? Excellent.
Hi everybody, great. I'll just change presenter back to me. Great. Thanks for the synopsis, Sarah. That was wonderful. So some of you might be a bit confused by now about all the different options. And I think, I mean, that's one of the best things about Salesforce is it does give you options, and it's not about trying to fit yourself and shoehorn yourself into the one option that is available. So I'm just going to sort of show you a few different case studies and ways of doing it, and I think it's really about sitting down and going, what is it that we want to track, need to track, how do we work as an organisation, and then appraising the different options that are available on Salesforce, because there's definitely different ways of doing it, and every one of our clients has been slightly different. So I'm just going to show you for the last 5 minutes some different sort of extremities of what you could do. So starting with Locality, who's been one of our clients for the last 4 years. They had a volunteering program where they were matching professional volunteers to community groups across the UK. They custom built a series of objects and fields in Salesforce to manage that process and used an online form tool called Click Tools. So volunteers filled in an online application form. They would then be manually matched to run groups for community groups, and then they would be asked to complete an online form for reporting on how many hours of support they delivered and how did the volunteering process go. So it was very sort of very much based around online forms. The volunteers were not given access to Salesforce. They were just asked to fill in the form to report back on what had happened, and the performance and delivery was then tracked within Salesforce itself. At the other extreme, we've also set up a website called Talent Match Southeast, which matches professional volunteers to young people. Now, within this, we did build out a custom set of objects which collected all the information. But what it is fully branded, so you wouldn't even know the solution was on Salesforce. So what I'm going to do is just take you through to the web page. So this is the website, Talent Match Southeast, and this is using a Visualforce base on Salesforce. Now, what this does is if we click on East Sussex, it provides a searchable directory, which is all powered by Salesforce, to find provision in certain areas. So as a volunteer, if I'm supporting a young person, I might want to find what support is available in Bexhill, and I might want to choose industry and type, and I might want to do a search, and it will bring up the various options. And if I click on one of these options, what it will do is open this up with further information, and all of this information is Salesforce. It's all pulling it all from Salesforce. What it's got is a front page on it, which makes it look different, quite apparently. It's just like looking at a website. And then if you click apply now, what it will do is email through to that provider directly. Now for volunteers, they log in here and they can log in and record what they do with their volunteers. And again, when they log in, it looks completely like this website. It doesn't look like the community area that I showed you originally, because that's more of a basic sort of basic face. It's using the main sort of functionality that Salesforce offers to do branding. Whereas with this, we have customized and fully branded this. So again, you wouldn't look at, you wouldn't know you were looking within a Salesforce ecosystem. But this type of functionality you can see here with the searching parameters, this type of functionality can be used to explore sales volunteer roles. So again, you could say you want to find certain volunteer roles that are provided and provide search parameters so people can find volunteer roles and apply for them, just as we showed before. So that's kind of another extreme of what you can do with Salesforce. And everything's kind of driven from that aspect, and they use community licenses for the volunteers and the young people. In terms of the Shore Trust, they match volunteers to various different roles, whether it's within shops, schools, and employment hubs. And we had to rebuild Volunteers for Salesforce for them, because Volunteers for Salesforce is a great app, but it uses a custom object, sorry, it uses a standard object called campaigns, which isn't available at the low price point for customer community licenses. And ideally, for volunteers, you don't want to be paying a massive amount for community licenses to enable volunteers to log in. So we rebuilt Volunteers for Salesforce with it excluding campaigns, so it could be used for customer community license users. Now, what they wanted to do is allow volunteers to log in and self-service their availability and also provide this peer community using Chatter. So volunteers are able to log in, put what shifts they're available for, and then also talk to other volunteers. And that allows their advisors to go in and to see what volunteers are available and to match them directly into shifts, as I showed you previously, and that supports their delivery and management. They also use form assembly for online application forms and reference requests, and they have also developed this branded community area, as I've mentioned before. In terms of Trailblazers, they manage volunteers to do mentoring with ex-offenders, and they have also set up a custom community to allow their mentees to log in and log the support they're delivering with clients. And these volunteers have a big emphasis on also tracking outcomes with volunteers. So they're there to report on whether they've achieved certain units of their qualification or whether they've achieved certain outcomes like progressing into jobs. And so volunteers now log in into their community and also have access to the Chatter community to also converse with other volunteers. They also do use form assembly as part of their application and reference request process. And so we've set up a branded community for them. So we've had many different volunteer clients. Salesforce, it can be used in various different ways. And so we're happy to answer questions. I appreciate we're getting to 11 o'clock here, so you might want to email us directly after the session, and both Sarah and myself can answer calls. In terms of further support, we do offer the full in-house sort of consultancy support to help you set up a volunteer management system. But we also do offer a DIY in-house coaching support, so we can actually support in-house administrators and support them to think about the best options and provide guidance on developing them on a volunteer management system in-house as more of a lighter touch intervention. And we also are offering a small charities program where we're offering 6 days free support on a 12-day project because we're currently working with Salesforce administrator trainees who are starting their course in November. So we're looking for some projects that we can work on through that. So if you have any questions, please put it in the question box now. If not, thank you very much for joining, and hopefully that has been useful for you today. Thank you.